Well, it's good to see all of you again. Yay. So last week we talked about just what it was to be a prophet and what the Torah has to say about it. And if you remember, the Torah had to say that if a prophet advises the people to turn away from God, from the God of Israel, then that's not a true prophet. If a prophet is a true prophet, then his prophecies or her prophecies will come to pass. But if a true prophet in Israel, a prophet who's a member of the Jewish people, tells the people to turn away from God, then this is not a good prophet, even if he can make things, he can predict the future, okay? And we talked about the fact that there were lots of prophets. And I was trying to think about how to imagine this. So imagine that you've seen a Broadway play with a cast of, like dozens and dozens, lots of chorus members, big orchestra, the whole 9 yards. If you walk away knowing the names of the 3 or 4 leads, of the actors who played those leads, you did pretty well. But you probably could not recite off the names of all the people in the chorus. And there were so many people practicing the craft, if you will, of prophecy. There were just hundreds of them. And we're going to see some examples of that in today's texts. So today we're going to talk about the 2 most famous of the early prophets. So there were hundreds of early prophets, but these 2 guys rose above the crowd. So before we start, I'd like to ask you, when I say the name Elijah the prophet, what do you think? Shout it out, anybody. Rio, what were you going to say?
Passover? Am I thinking?
Passover. Of course, Elijah shows up at Passover. Yes, somebody else.
A chariot.
The chariot taking Elijah up into the heavens. Yes. Anything else? Nobody ever had a boy child?
Oh, Elijah's chair.
Elijah's chair. Elijah shows up apparently at every bris. So we have to have a chair for Elijah. Eliyahu has his own chair. So what do you think of the character of Elijah? Who do you think he is? What kind of, would you, like if you sat down, you had a beer with him, what would he be like?
Oh, he would be like, some of the crazy person you meet on the street.
Okay. He'd be a little crazy, yeah. Anything else? Would you think of him as being violent?
No.
No.
Oh, he's the one he's the crazy person you want to have for lunch.
Okay, thank you very much. He's the crazy person you want to invite over and have for lunch. So today we're going to look at some of the stories, some of the probably, hundreds and hundreds of stories. Both Rabbi Tilchin and I spent part of our previous lifetimes as professional storytellers, and I would bet that she and I could fill an hour or more with just the Elijah stories that we know and have told, like in concert, okay? So that's something that I think of when I have an association with Elijah. It always goes back to the stories. And in fact, I have a personal relationship with Elijah because my bat mitzvah was Parsha Pinchas. And if you know the Haftarot for Parsha Pinchas, it is said so rarely because Pinchas, that date for Shabbat Pinchas, frequently falls too late in the calendar for us to hear that Haftarah. In other words, if Shabbat Pinchas falls after the 17th or the 10th or whatever of Tammuz, then we have to start those Haftarot of rebuke. And the Haftarah Pinchas doesn't even get heard. So when I was a kid and preparing for my bat mitzvah, the cantor taught me the Haftarot from Pinchas without realizing that the calendar wouldn't permit it. And I had to learn a second Haftarah in very short order. So I've always known a particular story about Elijah, and I've always thought that he was kind of my guy, okay? When we try to place Elijah in history, Elijah is about 9th century BCE. So he is about the year 1000, something like that, on one or either side of that millennial year, okay? Because of course we don't know exactly. And the other thing that's really funny about Elijah is that he doesn't come from a prominent family. He just sort of shows up, and we're going to see that in the text. Elijah comes into the text, into our knowledge, in the book of Kings, first book of Kings. He is the prophet who goes up against King Ahav. Now, we talked about the jobs of a prophet. Job number 1, go where God sends you. Job number 2, speak truth to power. And job number 3 is to stand in the breach between God and the people Israel. So Elijah's job is to go up to King Ahav and tell him that he has messed up. And it appears in the first book of Kings in about chapter, at the end of 16, beginning of 17. So I want to read that so we have a kind of sense. Just so you know, by the time Elijah shows up, the kingdoms have split. The northern kingdom is Israel. The southern kingdom is Judah. Elijah is a prophet of the northern kingdom. Most of the other guys we're going to see are going to be southern kingdom prophets. And that's primarily because the northern kingdom gets squashed by the Assyrians. And so prophecy after that period is going to happen in the southern kingdom. So we're in the northern kingdom, we're in the kingdom of Israel, and I'm going to share my screen with you guys. So I'm going to start. Ahab, the son of Omri, became king over Israel in the 38th year of King Asa of Judah. So Ahab was in Israel, and Asa was down south in Judah. And Ahab, son of Omri, reigned over Israel in Samaria for 22 years. That's just a little overview. It just tells you how long his kingdom is going to exist. And Ahab, son of Omri, did what was displeasing to God. Not only that, because his father and his father's father had also screwed up, but apparently Ahab really went for it all. Because not content to follow the sins of Jeroboam, who was an earlier king, the son of Nebat, a much earlier king, Ahab takes to wife Jezebel. Yes, that Jezebel, daughter of King Ethbaal of the Phoenicians, and he went and served Baal and worshipped him. So this is just about as bad as you can get. This is all the worst things that a prophet can do. Not only does he go to take a wife of another kingdom, but he goes and serves their gods, worships their gods. He built an altar to Baal in the temple of Baal that he built in Samaria. Yes, not content. And he made a sacred post that's called an Asherah. And now the author or the writer downer of the book of Kings is saying Ahab did more to provoke the anger. He's just putting in a little editorial comment. This guy really was the pinnacle of bad. And we have this little bit about what he had gone. Hiel the Bethlehemite fortified Jericho. He laid the foundations at the cost of his firstborn. I don't know what that means. Set its gates in place at the cost of his youngest. in accordance with the words that God had spoken through Joshua ben Nun. Now we're going to see some guy show up. Who wants to read? Go ahead, Sylvie. I can see you reaching for your mouse.
A secret hand. Elijah, the Tishbite, an inhabitant of Gilead, said to Ahab, as the eternal lives, the God of Israel, whom I serve, there will be no dew or rain except at my bidding.
Okay,
Word
so Elijah is like, we have no idea who this guy is. He just shows up. He came from the town of Tishbe, which is in the province of Gilead, and he's got a mouth. And literally, this is the first time we see his name. And you have to wonder, who told him that he should go and proclaim a drought? Because that's what he does. But after we hear this piece of information, now we get God talking.
The word
Go
of
ahead,
God
Sylvie.
came, yeah, I'm sorry. The word of God came to him, leave this place, turn eastward and go into hiding by the Wadi Cherith, which is east of the Jordan. You will drink from the wadi, and I have commanded the ravens to feed you there. He proceeded to do as God had bidden. He went and he stayed by the Wadi Cherith, which is the east of the Jordan. The ravens brought him bread and meat every morning and every evening, and he drank from the wadi.
So right off the bat, even though we know nothing about Elijah, we know that God performs miracles on behalf of Elijah.
Mhm.
God gives Elijah, the green light to do a whole bunch of things. We're going to see. And he gets ravens to feed him, which is kind of cool. And then the wadi dries up. There's no rain in the land. Why is there no rain in the land, by the way? Because Elijah proclaimed a drought.
Yeah. And it happened.
And it happened. Okay. So, next piece. Somebody else wants to read. Anybody? Go ahead.
I'll read for a minute. Where do you want me to start? I have to be fast.
And the word of God.
I have 4 dogs here. What?
Okay. And the word of God.
And the word of God came to him. Go at once to Zarephath of Sidon and stay there. I have designated a widow there to feed you.
Okay, so
he
not
went-
ravens. Ravens were not enough. Now we get a widow. Okay.
So he went at once to Zarephath. When he came to the entrance of the town, a widow was there gathering wood. He called out to her, please bring me a little water in your pitcher and let me drink. And as she went to fetch it, he called out to her, please bring along a piece of bread for me. As the eternal your God lives, she replied, I have nothing baked, nothing but a handful of flour in a jar and a little oil in a jug. I am just gathering a couple of sticks so that I can go home and prepare it for me and my son. We shall eat it and then we shall die.
Okay, so now we are like setting up the next miracle. We're setting up the next miracle. It's so cool. So, God said a widow's going to feed you, but the widow says, I don't have anything. And we're going to die. We're going to eat whatever we've got, and then we're going to croak. Okay, somebody else, pick it up. Anybody? Go ahead.
I'll read.
Go ahead, Rosalie. Thank you.
Don't be afraid, said Elijah to her. Go and do as you have said. But first make me a small cake from what you have there and bring it out to me. Then make some for yourself and your son. For thus said the Eternal, the God of Israel, the jar of flour shall not give out, and the jug of oil shall not fail until the day that God sends rain upon the ground. She went and did as Elijah had spoken, and she and he and her household had food for a long time.
Okay, miracle number 2. Miracle number 2, the never-ending jar of flour and the never-ending jug of oil. All right, it's just going to keep happening. Don't worry about it. And I think it's really fun, too, that Elijah has the audacity to say, for God said this will happen. Because I just read the part above it, and God doesn't say that. God doesn't say that. Elijah says it. I love Elijah so much. He is such a fun character. Okay, so Elijah says, you're going to have another miracle. You have a miracle. And it just goes just exactly as God had spoken through Elijah. Okay, so now we're going to have miracle number 3. After a while, the son of that woman, the owner of the house, fell sick, and his illness grew worse until he had no breath left in him. And she said to Elijah, what harm have I done to you that you should come here to recall my sin and cause the death of my son? And he said, give me the boy. And taking him from her arms, he carried him to the upper chamber, which is where he was staying, which is going to be like something interesting to remember, by the way. And he laid him down upon his own, Elijah's own bed. And he cries out to God. He says, my eternal God, will you bring calamity upon this widow whose guest I am, and let her son die? And then here's the creepy part. He stretched out over the child 3 times. I don't know what picture your mind makes of that. And he cried out to God, saying, my eternal God, let this child's life return to his body. And God heard Elijah's plea. Okay, because you are the one who makes miracles, and he revives him. And Elijah picks the child up, brings him down from the upper room into the main room, and hands him over to his mom. See, your son is alive. And the woman said, now I know that you are an agent of God and that the word of God is truly in your mouth. Why? Because what he says comes to be. What Elijah says happens, right? So that's one of those marks of a true prophet that we were talking about. So now we're going to go a little bit further. So Jezebel, remember, is the wife of King Ahab, and she is killing off the prophets of God. And I want you to notice that she's killing off like hundreds of prophets, because Obadiah, who is like, the local steward of the castle, took 100 prophets and hid them in 2 different caves and gave them food and drink. So he's hiding 100 prophets. And she's killing off prophets left and right. When I say to you that there were lots and lots of prophets, I am not kidding. I just want to take a look at the chat. First recorded case of CPR. Yes, absolutely, Dr. Stewart. Absolutely. So he stretches out, and we're going to see a much more graphic description of this later when Elisha does the same miracle. Because, if Elijah does it, Elisha does it. It's like, oh, okay. All right. So Jezebel's killing off prophets. And suddenly Obadiah is on the road when Elijah confronts him. And Obadiah looks at him and says, is that you, my Lord Elijah? Now you might wonder, how the heck would he know that? How would he know that? Well, there's an interesting story. I'm going to skip and I'll come back. In 2 Kings, there's a story that, I have to go back a little. Okay. This is a story that happens years later. After Ahab dies, Moab, the country, the nation of Moab, rebelled against Israel. All right, now, new story. Ahaziah, who was the next king, fell through the lattice in his upper chamber and was injured, which just sounds incredibly funny to me. I don't know what happened, but at any rate, he sends messengers and he instructs them to go inquire of Beelzebub. Go inquire of this foreign god, the god of Ekron, if I'm going to recover. Go inquire of Beelzebub. So an angel of God said to Elijah, the Tishbite, right? Go and confront the messengers of Samaria and say to them, what's the matter? You don't have a God of your own that you have to go ask about Beelzebub? What is that? That's crazy. And assuredly, God says that Elijah should say, you shall not rise from the bed you are lying on, you will die. So Elijah goes out, and the messengers go back to Ahaziah, and he says, why have you come back? And they answered him, this guy came to us, and he said, go back to the king who sent you and say to him, thus says the Eternal, is there no God in Israel that you must send to inquire of Beelzebub, the god of Ekron? Assuredly, you shall not rise from the bed you are lying on, but you shall die. A man, just a man, right? Well, so what sort of man was it, he asked them, who came toward you and said these things? And they said, a hairy man with a leather belt tied around his waist. Oh, he says, why, that's Elijah the Tishbite, right? So Elijah is well known. He's the crazy person on the corner, dressed in some shmata, with which is way too big for him. It's going to fall down off his tuchus. And he's got a big old leather belt around his waist to hold all the stuff up. So it's a very accurate picture that somebody said about the crazy man. He is like that. He is a crazy guy. So let's go back to Kings. So Obadiah looks at him, recognizes him, and said, aha, must be you because you're hairy and you've got a belt around your waist. Yes, he said, it is I. Go tell your Lord that Elijah is here. And to make a long story a little shorter, so the servant Obadiah doesn't want to go back because Jezebel has been killing all the prophets of God. And I hid some. If I go back, somebody is going to kill me. And Elijah says, don't worry about it. I promise you I will show up. So Obadiah goes away, and Ahab sees Elijah. And he calls him by this name, Troubler of Israel. So remember that description of prophets? They are the ones who stir the pot. They're the ones who tell somebody when you are doing wrong. They make trouble. That's what prophets do. And he's saying that you are a big fat troublemaker. And Elijah says, look, it's not me. You and your father and your father and your father's father and your father's father's father have brought trouble by forsaking the commandments of God and going out after Baal. So now, summon all of Israel to join us at Mount Carmel with the 450 prophets of Baal and 400 prophets of Asherah. So we're talking about 850 prophets. So if you thought that prophecy was somehow limited to a very few people, you're very wrong. A lot of prophets. Okay? So they bring all these prophets. And now Elijah approaches the people Israel and says, look, how long are you going to keep banging back and forth between two different gods? How long will you keep hopping? If the Eternal One is God, then follow the Eternal. And if Baal is God, follow Baal. But you can imagine that the people had nothing to say. Elijah says, I'm the only prophet of God left. Not true. Not true. Because the others are hiding in caves, of course. But he says, I'm the only one here, right? I don't come here with a gang of prophets all set to do our magic. It's just me. And now he's going to perform a miracle. And I'm going to stop sharing so I can tell you the story because it's a great story. He says, take 2 bulls, slaughter one and place it on an altar, and let all the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah march around and do whatever they can without putting fire on it and ask their God to accept this sacrifice. And sure enough, they take a bull and they slaughter it, they split it, and they put it on this altar. And 850 prophets cry out to their gods and sing and hop from one foot to the other and tear their garments and scratch their faces until the blood runs and scream for hours and hours and hours. Nada, nothing happens. And finally, when they are exhausted or hoarse from doing that, Elijah says, bring a jug of water and pour it over this bowl, which is mine. He repairs an altar by putting 12 stones around it to symbolize the 12 tribes. And the servants go and they bring water and they douse that bowl. And he digs a trench all around the altar, a deep trench. And he says, bring more water, bring more water, bring more water, until finally the bowl is completely soaked and the water has run down and filled up the trench. And then Elijah says, stand back. May the one God, the true God, the God of Israel, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, accept this sacrifice. And boom! Fire comes down from the heaven and consumes that bowl until nothing's left but ashes. Now he turns to the people and says, those are the false prophets. Kill them all. And the people Israel take off after these scattered prophets of Baal and Asherah and kill them. That's Elijah. Elijah is crazy, violent, a showboat. He makes big, flashy miracles. That's who he is. I mean, it's really kind of an amazing picture. And partly because he is so profoundly present in the books of Kings. And by the way, you don't see him. I mean, think about it. Of all the people in the Torah and all the people that all the rabbis we hear about, Elijah is the one who has gained sort of international fame. Elijah is a prophet to Christians and to Muslims. He is revered by Muslims. I want to show you a beautiful painting of Elijah. Can you see it? Did I get the share right? All right. So this is in a church in Italy. A lot of places, I was in Italy in May and June, and everywhere I went, I saw certain people, certain icons and certain paintings and statues. Elijah, Elisha, Moses, they are everywhere. They are the guys who are the headliners. They have achieved fame. So this is one picture, just one of millions of pictures of Elijah the prophet.
He looks very calm.
Yeah, he looks calm, but he also looks like not a happy camper. It's not.
He doesn't look crazy.
He doesn't look crazy. He looks stern. Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Maybe he's bipolar. No.
Maybe he's bipolar. One of my very, very favorite. Who
What
was
is he
talking? Go
supposedly
ahead,
holding?
son.
What is he supposedly holding? The scroll.
Oh, he's holding a scroll predicting who the Messiah is. Who do you think? All right. Now, so Elijah, first of all, has this reputation for being the kindly old gentleman who does miracles. He does indeed do miracles. And I could bring out books and books and books of folklore and midrash and stories about Elijah doing all kinds of miracles. And I was, looking kind of for a list so that I wouldn't have to go scrambling through so many different. And you know how sometimes you look for something, you find a little, something taps you on the shoulder and says, I'm thinking of you, or pay attention. It's like if I used to hear my father's voice sometimes. And it was a really wonderful thing. So I went on the repository of all knowledge, the internet, and I said, Elijah stories, Talmud and Mishnah. And one of the documents that came up was by a rabbi who has passed away. His name is Rabbi Stephen Sager. He was a wonderful rabbi, charismatic workshop leader, and storyteller himself in his own right. And I heard him several times do workshops or tell stories. And this is his note, his thing that he distributed to his congregation before the high holidays. And he said to them, I'm thinking about Elijah a lot these days. What did he say? Every year as we approach the days of awe, the Yamim Noraim, I reflect on ways in which my previous year's talks have made their way back to me in conversations in classes and letters. Unfailingly, the most recalled elements of any talk are the stories. The stories that we remember tell who we are, right? Our stories, we don't tell the stories tell about us, they tell us. So he said, I have been thinking about Elijah's stories, and he is planning, like about 5 or 6 years ago maybe, he is planning his high holiday sermons to be around these stories of Elijah, and he's giving his congregation a heads up, right? So I have lots of stories that and then I thought, Steve Sager, do I have to ask for permission to use this? And then I sent an email, and then I thought, Steve Sager died 2 years ago, 3 years. Steve's gone. So sure enough, I was right. Steve is not there to ask permission. So I say that if it came to me, it's mine. So I wanted to share one story from the ones that he tells. He tells this story about, and it's told in the Talmud in Masechet Barachot. All right. So now the whole of the Masechet Barachot is all about where you can say your blessings, how you say your blessings, when to say the blessings, which blessings go, like it's in detail. That's what the Masechet is about. So there's an ancient story that comes from the Talmud. Rebbe Yossi said, once I was traveling, and the time came to say the Amidah. And so I went into one of the ruins, the Chorba of Jerusalem, the ruins of Jerusalem, to pray. And Elijah, Zachor Latov, remembered for good, came and waited for me at the entrance until I finished my prayer. And after I finished my prayer, he said to me, my son, Shalom Aleichem, my master. And I said to him, Shalom Aleichem, Alechem Shalom, my master and teacher. And he said, my son, why did you come into this ruined building to pray? And I said to him, the time came to pray and I was on the road. And he said, you should have prayed on the road. And I said to him, but I was afraid because passers-by might interrupt my prayers. And Elijah said to me, you should have prayed the abbreviated form. Story goes on, but I want to stop. In Masechet Barachot, this discussion is about whether you can go into a ruined building to say your prayers. And no, there's a big argument. There could be demons there. It could fall down on you. It's bad. But what if I'm out on the road? Somebody can interrupt me. No. And that's why, because Elijah says you should have said Havinenu, an abbreviated form of the Amidah. If you go into any standard Siddur to the Amidah, either right before it or right after it, you'll see an abbreviated form of it called Havinenu, which condenses all the big blessings into one big thing. Havinenu. It's a shortened form of the Amidah that you can daven much faster. And so Elijah is used as the proof that you can do this. You can say a shortened form of the Amidah, right? Modern authors have used Elijah in all sorts of stories. I don't know if, does anybody know the Passover story called The Magician? It's by the author Yud Lamed Peretz, Ayel Peretz. He wrote this wonderful story about a poor old couple who have no food for Passover. They have nothing. And nonetheless, they draw their curtains. They don't ask for help. They sit in their house and they try to have a Passover Seder. And at that moment, there's a knock on the door. And this crazy stranger who had been performing magic tricks in the town square said to them, "I'm sorry, I have nowhere to be for Pesach." And they said, "We have very little to offer you, but you can come in and sit. But you'd be better anywhere else." And he said, "Oh no, I think this is the right house." So the strange man who performed all sorts of crazy miracles came into their house. He said, "Dear, dear, dear, this will never do." He looked at the hard little chairs that they had and he said, "Soften up." And the chairs became big, round, lounging chairs with pillows. And then he snapped his fingers and the table moved into the center of the room, and he moved his hands and a tablecloth settled down like snow on that table. And then he whirled his hands around and said an incantation, and from everywhere things came arriving, candlesticks on the table and food and wine and everything you can imagine, glittering crystal and shiny silverware, everything, beautiful plates, everything you can possibly imagine. The old couple were terrified and they went running out of the house. And they ran to the house of the rabbi and explained what had happened. And the rabbi thought, and he said, "Go back. If you can sit in the chairs, if the food has smell and taste, if the wine has savor for you, then it is a good thing. And if you go back and everything falls apart to ashes, then it is bad magic." They went back and the stranger was gone. But the food was there and the candles were lit and the wine was even poured. And they sat down. And they raised a glass and they toasted this stranger who must have been, who knows? And they had a beautiful Passover Seder. Right? So, for you, for me, for anyone, we understand what's implied there. We understand that the implication is that this is Eliyahu HaNavi who has come to make this miracle. But it was a literary story written by Ayel Peretz in the last century, right? Elijah just keeps popping up. Yes, Ria.
So I see this, all these stories underlying as being the concept of hope and to never give up and not go in despair, but to always try to get to the next, that you just don't give up and say, "That's it, goodbye."
Elijah comes to give you hope in your darkest moment.
Yes.
And to make miracles, and that miracles are around the corner, that the existence of miracles happens even now in funny ways. The stranger who gives a waitress $100 tip or $1,000 tip, like all sorts of things. And one of the reasons that we can continue to say that Elijah shows up is because Elijah never dies. Elijah never dies. We don't have anything. Yes, Rosalie. You have to, I can't hear you, sweetie. You have to unmute.
Can you see this picture?
Yes, yes.
Oh, okay. The man with the cotton ball beard
Uh-huh.
is Elijah. Oh, I
Yes.
lost it.
It's okay. We got it. He's
just
he's
lost
at
it.
a
That was my son about 18 years ago with my 2-year-old grandson who's 20 now. But that
oh,
picture always, I've lost it, I guess.
that's
I can't-
okay. We got it.
You,
We
you,
got
you
it.
saw it, and it's just so adorable because
really
for about
is.
3 years he would leave the table, go into another room. My daughter
And then
would
come
put
back.
the cotton balls and then come back with his sandals on and a sheet around him, and the kids loved it until
To
they
show
caught
up at the Seder, absolutely. Okay, so I want to explain why it is that Elijah still lives. Before his death, we have that famous story, the one that's in my Haftarot, about after he messes with the prophets of Baal, right? Jezebel's really not happy, furious, and sends soldiers to go and find Elijah and kill him. He goes up into the mountains and he goes into a cave, and God comes to him and says, "Why are you here?" And Elijah says, "They're coming after me. They want to kill me. I'm your true prophet. You should protect me." And God says, "Okay, I'll tell you what. Go over there and stand right near that stone over there." And God brings a whirlwind, huge wind, and God is not in the wind. And God brings fire, massive fire, and God is not in the fire. And then when everything quiets down, there's a soft murmuring sound. And out of that soft murmuring sound, God says to Elijah, "Why are you here?" Now, in the Torah, in the Haftarah, Elijah repeats exactly what he said before. "I am your prophet, and I am faithful to you, and they're going to kill me." I mean, exactly word for word. "You've got to take care of me." Now, when I first read that, I thought, what if you change the tone of it? What if he says, "I am your true prophet. I have faith in you. They're going to kill me. I come to you for help." Then it becomes one thing. But it's exactly the same. So the rabbis say Elijah has learned nothing about being the still small voice. Elijah is still blustering. Elijah is still, "I'm the man." And then God says to him, "Okay, go back. Go back to the people who want to take your life. And on your way, by the way, pick up this guy named Elisha. And if they kill you, I'll use him." God essentially says, you have to give your life in service to this. I mean, you may not get killed, but you might. Go and take with you Elisha, and he will be your disciple, and he will be my prophet after you. Okay? So Elijah goes wandering down the road, and he says, "You, come with me." Gives him a mantle, gives him a cloak. And Elisha says, "Well, I have to say goodbye to my parents." Elijah says, "Look, you don't want to come, don't come." He says, No. Elisha goes back, takes a bull, kills the bull, 2 bulls, by the way, echoes of the other thing, right? He kills 2 bulls. He cooks an enormous meal, feeds everybody there, and then he takes off after Elijah and becomes the next person in that line. Elisha comes from a famous and wealthy family. Elijah, not so much. So it's a very interesting thing to have Elisha essentially give everything up, walk away from it, and follow Elijah. Now, the death of Elijah, yes, Rhea.
I'm sorry, I didn't want to interrupt, but I was thinking that Elijah is the model for Jesus.
Not the model for Jesus, but we're going to come to that.
Okay,
Yeah, don't jump the gun because I got that
I'm
on my
sorry.
agenda. No, it's okay.
Okay.
It's okay. So now I want to show us the text about the death of Elijah. Okay, so this is Elijah. You know, he says, "I'm the hairy guy," right? This is in Second Book of Kings, which is mostly going to be about Elisha, by the way. He's still killing prophets, by the way. He's killed a whole batch of other servants, slaughtering them. Okay, so now, here we go. When God was about to take Elijah up to heaven in a whirlwind, Elijah and Elisha set out from Gilgal. And Elijah said to Elisha, "Stay here, for God has sent me on to Bethel." And Elisha says, "No, I'm not leaving you." Disciples of the prophets at Bethel came to Elisha and said to him, "Did you know that God will take your master away from you today?" And Elisha says, "I know it. Be silent." Then Elijah said to him, "Elisha, stay here, for God has sent me on to Jericho." "No, as God lives and as you live," said Elisha, "I will not leave you." This is a little bit like Ruth saying, "Entreat me not to leave you." So they go on to Jericho. The disciples of the prophets who were at Jericho came over to Elisha and said, "Do you know that God will take your master from you today?" And he replied, "I know it too. Be silent." And Elijah says, "Stay here." And the same pattern repeats, and Elisha will not leave him. So they come at a distance and they stop, whereupon Elijah takes his mantle and rolling it up, he struck the water of the Jordan River. And it divided to the right and to the left, so that the two of them, Elijah and Elisha, crossed over on dry land. And as they were crossing, Elijah says to Elisha, "What can I do for you before I am taken from you?" And Elisha says, "Let a double portion of your spirit pass on to me." So Elisha is talking like a first son. The first son inherits twice as much as anyone else. Elisha is essentially saying, "I need your power, as much of it as you can pass to me." "So you've asked me a difficult thing," said Elijah. "If you see me as I am taken from you, this will be granted to you, and if not, it will not. It's not up to me." And as they kept walking and talking, a fiery chariot with fiery horses suddenly appeared, separating one from the other. And Elijah went up to heaven in a whirlwind. And Elisha saw it, and he cried out, "Oh, Father, Father, Israel's chariots and riders." When he could no longer see him, he grasped his garments and tore them in two. He picked up Elijah's mantle, which had dropped from him, from Elijah, and he went back and stood on the other bank of the Jordan. And taking the mantle that had dropped from Elijah, he struck the water and said, "Where is the Eternal, the God of Elijah?" And as he too struck the water, it parted to the right and to the left, and Elisha crossed over. And now the disciples of the prophets at Jericho see him from a distance, and they say, "The spirit of Elijah has settled on Elisha." Okay? So now we have the passing over of this, not just the physical mantle and the spiritual mantle rests on the shoulders of Elisha. And he is now, as recounted mostly in the book in 2 Kings, he is now going to perform lots of miracles. He's going to duplicate the miracle that Elijah performed. He goes to a certain town and he hangs out there with this Shunammite, this woman, a wealthy woman. And occasionally he comes through town. Well, one day the Shunammite woman says to her husband, You know, that man of God comes by a lot. Let's fix up a place for him on the second story, on the roof, so that he can stay comfortably. So they make a bed and a table and a place for him to sit on the roof of the house. And Elisha spends his time, when he comes through that village, he stays with them. She got older. Elisha comes after one of these episodes and says to them, for your kindness, God has said that you, in 1 year, you shall have a child. She says, don't make fun of me. I'm an old lady and my husband's an old man. What does this remind us of? What's the intertextual reference? Abraham and Sarah. She says, I'm old, he's old, no kids. Sure enough, she gets pregnant, she has a child. The next time he comes by, this baby is there. And time goes by and time goes by. And eventually, one day, the boy is out in the fields with his father. And in the heat of the field, he goes, oh, my head. And his father says to one of the workmen, pick him up and carry him home to his mother. So they carry him home to his mother, who lays him on his bed, and he dies. She takes the boy and carries him up the stairs to Elisha's space, Elisha's room, and covers him. And then she goes out. Her husband says, what's going on? She says, nothing. She goes to find the man of God. And when she goes to him, the first thing he says is, how is it with you? And she says, it is well with me. But this child, did you give me this child just so that it would die? Elisha goes back with her, climbs up the stairs to go, or up the ladder to go to where his bed is, where the boy lies. Elisha lies down on top of him, places hand on hand, eyes on eyes, mouth on mouth, and breathes into this boy. And after a while, the body of the boy becomes warm and it takes breath and lives again. And the Shunammite woman says, blessed is the man who comes from God. Blessed is the God of Israel, the eternal one. Right? The same kind of miracle. Elisha's going to duplicate a lot of Elijah's miracles, but without the bloodshed. Both Elisha and Elijah are big deals in Christianity, in Islam, in Baha'i, in all of those faiths around the world, and in like places you would not imagine Elisha and Elijah show up. Elijah can still show up. Elisha dies and is buried, but Elijah can still show up because he never died. He was taken physically and bodily into heaven. And so because he never dies, he's still around at every bris. Oh, it's time. Oh, no, I got 7 minutes. I'm going to use every single second of it. He can still show up at every bris. He can still show up at every Passover Seder. He can still show up. I even made an Elijah story. When I say that people are still creating Elijah stories, I created one a number of years ago to tell at Sukkot about Elijah. Essentially, I took the story of the magician, the Passover story, and I transposed it into Sukkot, and he expands a Sukkah, never mind. But you see, we're always creating stories because Elijah didn't die. He's fair game. Does anybody know about others who are taken up bodily into heaven who never die? Anybody know about Serach bat Asher? So of the sons of Israel, well, everyone knows about Serach bat Asher? No, not really. Oh, Enoch, yes, Enoch, thank you very much. I didn't see that. Thank you. Enoch never dies, taken up bodily to heaven. Serach bat Asher shows up at the time when the sons of Jacob make their descent into Egypt. When the whole family comes down, Serach bat Asher is enumerated in that group of people. And then she just keeps showing up. She tells, she just knows things. Like she knows, for example, that she knows that Joseph didn't die in the pit. She tells her father that Joseph is still alive in a dream. She tells his father so that he won't die. So Serach Bat Asher is around all over the place. She shows up in the time of David. She makes a comment about David, that David is inappropriate. And so because of that, Serach Bat Asher is also considered a miracle worker. She can show up in all sorts of places. All right? I want to do one more thing to explain why it is that we have so many connections with Elijah. Here's the book of Malachi, right? Malachi is a much later prophet. But he says, "Lo, I will send the prophet Elijah to you before the coming of the awesome, fearful day of God. He will reconcile parents with children and children with their parents, so that when I come, says God, I do not strike the whole land with utter destruction." And then when we say this part, we repeat that last sentence so that we have a positive note on which to end this Haftarah. Is Serach Bat Asher in Midrash? Absolutely. She's in Midrash Rabbah Breshit and in Shemot and in Sifrei, I believe. I'll see if I can find some references for you. Okay. So because Malachi says that Elijah will come before the fearful great day when God brings the Mashiach, at the end of Shabbat, every week, we sing Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Hatishbi. You can sing with me. Eliyahu, Eliyahu, Eliyahu Hagiladi. Bimhera ve'amenu, speedily and in our days. Yavo Eleinu, may he come to us. Im Mashiach ben David, with the Messiah, son of David. Im Mashiach ben David. So we sing it every Shabbat because another Shabbat has come and gone. Elijah is supposed to come on Shabbat to let us know about the Messiah. If another Shabbat has come and gone, then it's not time yet, and we still pray and we wait for Elijah to come, okay? And we have 3 minutes. I want to take any questions. I have one more thing in my head that I didn't do. I just can't remember what it is. Any questions, any comments? We have a few minutes. No? Okay.
Yeah. So I want to thank
No,
you.
I know what I want to finish with. Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. No, you
you
better
go.
before you forget again.
No, I won't forget. I got it.
Oh, I just want to thank you because I love the magical part. And even though my practical, objective mind says, this is nice stories, but there's something internal that wants this to be, and that wants a little bit of magic.
I have had more fun reading the Book of Kings than I ever imagined I would. Somebody said, wasn't this session about Isaiah? No, Isaiah's in the next session. Isaiah's in the next session. I want to say one last thing about Elijah. Who remembers the stuff that you do after the reading of the Megillah on Purim? One of the things that you say, thank you very much, Sandra. One of the things you say at the end of Purim is you say, "Cursed be Haman, blessed be Mordecai," and then you say, and also blessings, and also Charbonah. In the Purim story, Charbonah is the guy who says, "Didn't Haman put up a hanging place? If we're going to do something to him, well, there it is." Harbonah is the one who kind of says, yeah, it was so-and-so. Wasn't it Mordecai who did that good thing for the king? Harbonah is the guy who's chiming in with the little piece of information that pushes the story in the particular description. And at the end of it, it says, at the end of Purim, we say, and bless on Harbonah Zachor Latov. Blessings on Harbonah Zachor Latov. What does Zachor Latov mean? It means remembered for good. And that's what we say about Elijah rather, you've got me mixed, about Elijah in the blessings after meals. We say, Eliyahu Hanavi Zachor Latov, remembered for good. And so every time you see the rabbis say that there's this little Gezerah Shava, this similar phrase, every time you see Zachor Latov, remembered for good, it's really talking about Elijah. Right? Harbonah, whoever. It really is Eliyahu Hanavi. I got it in under the wire. It is 1:30. Thank you so much. I'm going to distribute the stories that Rabbi Sager collected because it's a wonderful little collection of stories from Talmud and Midrash about Elijah the prophet. And yeah, so I hope I see you all next week. This was a gas. Thank you very much.
You. Beautiful.
Thank you.
You